Hello, and welcome to the People Grow Places podcast, where we explore the virtuous circle of people, growth, and place. Brought to you by Grow Places and hosted by our founder, Tom Larson. Today, we have a special episode recorded on site at the Truman Brewery in East London, where we are excited to work in partnership with the Truman Brewery and local people in Brick Lane, Spitalfields and Banglatown.
Well, here we are back at the Truman Brewery at the sort of top floor of number 91 Brick Lane. I'm here with Tom from Grow Places, Angela and Letty from Arup. Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about what you're doing here at the Truman Brewery redevelopment and maybe where we're standing as well.
Okay, shall I go first?
Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Angela Crowther. I'm a director at Arup, and I'm leading our team across the breadth of all our disciplines. And really, I think at high level, that means that my job is to make sure that we're making this site and the public realm and the buildings the very best that it can be. And that's having an impact across all of the different factors that contribute to a place. So from structural engineering for the buildings and MEP engineering, through to fire and transport planning and logistics, through to ecology and making sure that we're making it as biodiverse as we can, thinking about all the environmental aspects, and then bringing in inclusivity of design and thinking about how we make it accessible and really maximise the social value and knit it into the wider area.
Is that your specialism, Letty?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm Letty Lucy. I'm a senior social impact specialist at Arup, and we've been commissioned to develop the public benefit statement for the whole master plan site. And that really, as Angela said, it really focuses on what the scheme can deliver for local people, the local community in a broader sense, but also the economy of Tower Hamlets itself as well. So that really macro lens. But I think it's important that it's not just the sort of core economic impact, it's also how it can affect the day-to-day lives of the current people who live near the site and also the future users of the site as well.
So, I mean, your scope is enormous. So it's the buildings, it's the actual impact of those buildings and all the spaces in between. So we're probably going to be walking around a lot today, but we thought we'd start here at 91. Tom, you're using this building quite a bit, but, you know, what does this building sort of signify in the development? You know, physically, is it located in the middle? Where are we at the moment?
Yeah, so we're at an amazing vantage point here across the Truman site. This is one of, if not the tallest kind of occupied floors within the existing Truman, and our development proposals are equivalent in scale to this. So it's a really good gauge of that. We also get an amazing aspect down over the majority of the main site, which we can talk about in a bit more detail. And I think here you can really see just how sort of central this site is. You know, we're 10 minutes walk from Liverpool Street Station, but we're in a really vibrant, diverse neighbourhood of Spitalfields and Banglatown. And then we're surrounded by, you know, you can see Whitechapel, you can see Aldgate, and you can see how those different kind of city neighbourhoods respond, and are on different scales. And what you appreciate here, you know, looking out over the rooftops and seeing the life and the variety of the city, and the kind of the grain of it is really, really exciting. And then you see these large brewery buildings that have been here there's a brewery on this site for over 350 years. And it is a kind of industrial and employment hub in the centre of this kind of urban grain is really, really exciting. So I think it's a great place to start the discussion from up here. And then just sort of circling back on, you know, the Arup role, you mentioned it's really broad. And I think a lot of people maybe don't appreciate or understand the variety and the depth of roles and specialisms that go into a project of this scale and complexity. And Arup are, you know, amazing at each and every one of those roles. But I think that the great thing from the client's perspective about working with Arup is you get that umbrella. So, you know, under Angela in this case is kind of overseeing all of those disciplines. So it feels coherent, it feels considered. And then, as you know, viewers of this will have seen, there's a number of different architects on this project as well, and that's really exciting. It's really great for celebrating the diversity in the industry, but also trying to create a vibrant place that feels rich and varied as opposed to just one hand, but behind that, we've then got, Arup as this consistent layer across all of the buildings and the spaces, and maybe we'll touch on some of those kind of principles that then inform the different buildings as we go. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting conversation and role that we could talk about today.
So we've got this fantastic vantage point here right in the middle of the development. Talk us through, can you point a little bit to sort of where you might be having an impact and anything that's coming out from the ground that we can have a look at from here?
Yeah, so shall I start? There's to the east of us here, we've got the main brewery yard, and you can see straight ahead there's an existing building called the Cooperage, which is really wonderful. I hope you've had a chance to go inside it. And then the very famous Truman chimney building and all its associated, what were originally stables and then converted into a hopper for the brewery, where a lot of the processes were done when it was a live brewery a bit later. So I think that happened at the end of the 18th century. And then the yard itself, which is a bit piecemeal and very much a working yard still that's used and full of industrial sheds at the moment. And so really this is the landscape for the main part of our master plan. And it's about identifying and understanding how we can really celebrate and make more of those wonderful existing assets. But how do we then turn what is just one massive yard into a place that really people are going to come to want to come and inhabit and is more than it currently is? And for us, a really big move in that was, first of all, to say, how do we make that public realm really enjoyable for people? So we've done a really interesting piece of work around microclimate and how you make the outdoors comfortable. So making sure you get enough sunlight in the space, making sure that when it is hot and sunny with climate change, it's not too hot and sunny, and people stay shaded and relaxed and cool and can enjoy being outdoors. And then thinking about things like, how do we service those existing and new buildings on site? Because if you're not careful, actually you've worked really hard to create a great public realm, and then you just end up with vehicles tracking all over the place constantly, so people can't sit outdoors and enjoy it as an environment. So working really, really hard to say, how do we minimise the number of vehicle movements we need to come and service our site without compromising any of the building functions? And then how do we consolidate that into an area of site so that we can make those yards vehicle free, so that people can just enjoy being in that place and enjoy all the events and vibrancy and respite and quiet spaces that we're aiming to provide.
Do you know what that looks like yet? Have you sort of solved those challenges, or is that something that needs to happen down the track?
Yeah, that's been a really massive focus, and I think it's a really good example actually of how that technical thinking needs to happen before anything else. If you do it as a bolt-on at the end, that's when mistakes happen and accidentally your nice seating is having to get moved so a vehicle can come through all the time. So I think that's a lovely example of all of your major principles of how a place functions should really happen before you then form the buildings around them.
Okay. And so, I mean, you mentioned these principles. Can you kind of just touch on those for people who might not sort of understand everything that you've had to consider that goes into this? What are those, is that about the light and the noise and the, is that what you're those are the principles that you're considering?
I think that's a really nice way of putting it. And yes, absolutely. I think if we sort of zoom out and think about design and the built environment, actually over the last however many years, maybe there's been not quite the focus that there could have been in terms of the outdoor spaces and public realm, and making sure that feels part of its wider environment, and then that the places themselves feel comfortable and everything they can be that people want to feel enjoyment of space, and that is enjoyable in an inclusive way for people like you and I and people with other really diverse needs. So I think what we're thinking about in the outdoors is really how do you make that experience of place really wonderful for everybody. Then when you move to the building design themselves, actually maybe that is where the focus has been, and bringing back into balance yes, but you don't make a place comfortable by just throwing everything at it. How do we come at it from you've got to do this in an environmentally responsible way, and start with first principles of let's make the buildings great and comfortable, but Let's do it by opening the windows and making them naturally ventilated. Let's do it by using the minimum amount of material that we can so that we're being responsible to the planet and really bringing those considerations back to the fore.
Yeah, I think any of us who work in the built environment, we do so because we're passionate about, well, buildings often, but obviously the spaces and the places that we're creating. But what you realise is that the majority of people's experience of the place isn't necessarily of the buildings. They're kind of the backdrop to the experiences that people have and to the memories that they make and to the, you know, the friends that they meet in a certain place. And that's much more experiential. That's much more environmental. So trying to think about what is it like to sit on a Tuesday in January and have a cup of coffee versus a Saturday in July and have a cup of coffee. How does a space feel at night? How does it feel in the day? And what then, thinking about the built fabric, how can we then maybe design those things or tweak the design to improve that quality of life, that experience for people?
Yeah, and I think just building on Angela's, your point about inclusivity, I think what we're trying to do here is it's about thinking about those different user groups and thinking about how you can make this place comfortable from a sort of physicality perspective, but also welcoming. You want people to kind of come through. Often people see a sort of perceived barrier or threshold and they think, well, you know, that isn't for me, or there's nothing there for me. But actually what we're trying to do through the public benefit statement is sort of make sure that we're embedding this in the community and that people feel that they are welcome and that they can take advantage of the opportunities and the kind of amazing things that are going to be taking place on the site. So that's part of our brief as well, and something that we're working hard with both the sort of architects from a physical perspective, but also how the spaces are used, how they're activated, what goes on inside those buildings as well. So it's about drawing people to the site, making sure that they feel welcome there.
And building on what's already here, right? I think, if I think back to when we introduced this project to the Arup team and across those sort of 20 plus disciplines that we're thinking about in depth, the glue that everyone was so excited about was this area as it exists. It's an amazing place, and it's all about evolving and building on that without losing the essence of what is already really special, right?
And talk to me a bit about how you understand the makeup at the moment of people. Who are the people that you want to build on, you know, because they've got to be looked after first, right? We're not always guaranteed that there's going to be a future influx of people.
Yeah.
We've got to retain who we've got here. So who are those people?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is not a blank canvas. There's a huge, vibrant, you know, diverse population that already lives, works, kind of this is home to so many people in the Spitalfields and Banglatown area. And it's an important hub as well. You know, you've got the cash and carry on site, for example, and that's a really key part of the Brick Lane, you know, business community. And so we're certainly not sort of assuming this is, you know, a blank canvas, and we're here to understand the local needs of those local residents, local business owners, the stakeholders in other community groups and other organizations as well. But we're also trying to think about the future users as well. So, you know, future tourists, future workers, future residents. You know, there's going to be new homes built on site. So what do those residents need, and how will they meld and how will they blend with the existing communities as well? And how can we facilitate that and bring those groups together? So yeah, we're thinking about all those sort of user groups.
How do you, this might be sort of lifting the lid, the secret sauce, but how do you find out, you know, so are you down on the streets asking people, or is this sort of reporting that you as a 20,000 strong sort of company has access to, you know, how can I know that what you've got, the information that you've got is right on who's here?
That's a great question. I mean, actually, we have literally been walking the streets, and colleagues in other practices have been doing so as well, very much from that social perspective. We've been doing it, for example, with things like, how do vehicles currently get around, and how many vehicles are using it, and how busy are some of the surrounding streets already? How do we prove that we're going to have a positive impact with our future moves? So we definitely get down on the street and count, as simply as that, and survey so that we understand what's existing now, and then can model and predict and build and analyse in terms of looking at the future proposals.
Mm-hmm. And the redevelopment as it stands and how you want it to look, how does that fit into wider plans, either in a similar sort of area or with London? You know, how does this fit in with what we want from our cities? You know, what can people expect from this space in 10 years' time, for example, that goes, yeah, actually, we've done this right? You know, is there anything that stands out for you?
Yeah, I think just picking up on something you said, you know, what do we want to see? And actually for us, it's about what does the community want to see and what can this site be for the current and future community as well. So we sort of have to extract ourselves from that a little bit. And that goes back to your question earlier about how do we know what local people want or future users want? And that's about, you know, we triangulate sort of statistical stuff. We look at local policy and kind of local consultations that have gone before. And we also, you know, we do have that those conversations with local people through engagement, through meetings with community groups, community organisations, stakeholders in the council and things like that. So we bring all of those views, insights together to really understand sort of what people want from this scheme and how it can be an exemplar of development and of master planning in London. So it's certainly not our choice of what happens here. It's very much what will be the best with this area. And I think, you know, as we've said in you know, previously, this is already such a huge hub and such a huge iconic part of London and part of this particular area in London. And I think just building on that existing sort of principles of what Truman Breweries is all about, because I think there's a lot of great stuff that maybe people aren't aware of about how Truman Estates look after their tenants. You know, there are lots of existing tenants already here, and how do we work with them and what can we do to evolve the scheme and make sure that it's as kind of bustling and vibrant and exciting as possible for new people as well.
I think that's spot on. And I think actually, again, back to the existing buildings, they're a fantastic example of then translating those principles and what we learn about place and the future of people's needs into design. A lot of it is about thinking long term and making sure that it can evolve and adapt and is flexible enough and loose enough as a design that you're not stuck with something today that won't be appropriate tomorrow. And those existing buildings are sort of really simple and have been hacked about and are loved in the way that they're used by their current tenants. So adopting some of those principles into the way that we design for the future.
And you've sort of touched on flexibility there, and I think, you know, regeneration going forward, you know, that's kind of going to be the linchpin word for everything that we do from now on. So environmentally, what are we looking at in terms of the impact, but also, you know, mitigation and efforts, whether I guess that's in the buildings as well as out on the streets? You know, what are we looking at in terms of the specifics, some of the specifics, I suppose, with how you're going to get, you know, make it comfortable in a yard? Because at the moment, all I can see is a yard, but, you know, what's that going to look like in terms of climate sort of resilience, as it were, in the future?
Well, if we take the yard, for example, and actually there's not a lot of landscape or natural environment there, but there is a fantastic park just to the north that's got tons of potential in terms of it's a great green space and can continue to evolve and become so much more. It's about how can you connect those green spaces and through the wider area with the moves that we make on our site and bring greening into our site to add biodiversity and ecological richness, but also recognising that that contributes to the healthiness of a place and how you feel in terms of feeling well in that place. So trees help with shading and cooling. Actually seeing green and seeing natural really de-stresses you. So making sure that we're thinking about those things from an external perspective. And then in terms of the buildings, we've worked really hard on a piece of thought leadership and then translating that ideas piece into the design of these buildings. So using it as a real test bed of innovation to say, if we think differently and if we start with these buildings from a perspective of how physics works and how can you get the massing of a building right so that it can just breathe, so that it can not get too hot or cold, so that there's enough air flowing through for us to feel ventilated and, you know, got enough oxygen through the building. How do we start with the physics of how those things work as principles, and then design a building mass around it to really make sure you've maximised the potential of it. And so that's been a real focus here. And so the various new builds that we have on site, we've really embedded those principles into it in terms of making sure they're not too fat, that we've got things like opening windows in them, that we've thought about the proportion of glazing and put it in a place where you really benefit from all the daylight and sunlight that can come in, but without getting all the negative benefits of it overheating the space. So really trying to play with those first principles of science, I guess, to say, how do you make a place great?
A lot of passive engineering as well, it sounds like. And you've mentioned the new builds. What about the historic builds? Are you having any influence on them as well?
Yes, so the building here is already an exhibition space, and really looking to take that from more of an informal exhibition space to a much more deliberately designed for cultural activities. And so we've worked with Chris Dyson Architects to say, well, what does that mean in terms of how it needs to function? What services do we need to bring in to help that? And how do we work with the space planning and arrange it all in the right way? And again, things like how do we upgrade the fabric? So it's an amazing building, but if you look up at the roof, lots of holes. So how do we do really simple things like upgrade the fabric of the roof and the facade to make sure that it's not just leaking energy or physically leaking rain in?
And Letty, I'd love to know, I mean, there's so much existing character here, and character plays such a strong and important role in sort of retaining social value. Talk to me a bit about how the history of the place informs and feeds into the character and the social.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, you can just see here just how many, heritage and historic parts there are to the site. And I think the team has worked so hard on retaining the buildings that have that sort of iconic, everyone knows the chimney there. The yards are really, they've got a lot of heritage value in them. And I think the team have done really well to kind of identify which buildings do need to be retained to kind of keep that legacy that Tom was saying, it's built up over 350 years. But how do we bring it into the future for the next generations as well? Spitalfields has evolved, time and time again. And I think this is just going to be a next evolution of that, but retaining that sort of embedded sort of fabric of heritage and culture, but also not just the sort of historic culture, but also the, newer culture, such as some of the street art, and how do we bring some of that creativity and artistic stuff that's been going on the site? How do we kind of keep hold of that and make sure that it doesn't sort of become whitewashed and sort of completely dissipates through the new development? We want to kind of bring that back on site as fast as we can, really.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I think the essence of the brief, I think, from ourselves and from Truman, it is this kind of attitude to growth, to evolution of the place. But that is much more a kind of conceptual thing about the neighbourhood, about the site, about the people, about the culture, and what we've talked about. That isn't necessarily directly related to the physical buildings. And what I mean by that is this isn't necessarily like a retrofit first agenda here, because that isn't necessarily always the right thing. Sometimes retrofit first is the right approach. Other times, actually, the buildings that exist, actually a demolition and a densification to make the most of urban brownfield land, to create vibrant places that are connected to great transport networks like we've got around here is the right answer. So we very much viewed what's a responsible approach to this site, and in quite a broad sense. And that can feel quite heavy, actually, when you start thinking about words like responsibility, but I quite like using it in design team meetings, actually, because it is kind of a big responsibility that we all have in the industry about how do we rethink and move forward. And actually, I think new development has a real key place to play within that, as does retrofit, as does do sort of lighter touch and other aspects, or doing nothing, frankly, as well. Sometimes that's the right answer. So we looked at the site as a whole through that open lens, and decided where we thought there was appropriate to place new buildings. And then, as Angela was touching on, once you've kind of made that decision, it's then, okay, well, how do we make those new buildings as responsibly as we can in the current climate. And again, I mean that in the broader sense. I don't just mean environmentally, I mean in planning context, in terms of what innovations we have to hand, what technologies we have to hand at the moment. And I think that was then an interesting brief that we tried to work within.
And I mean, if you don't mind me saying, it sounds like you're responsible for so much. You guys must be working so close together, just in terms of that umbrella vision and that overview. Tell me a bit about, you know, how that's working. And you guys must be in touch with all the consultants, you know, across every week. You know, tell me about the sort of the inner machinations of that. How is it working? How are you managing it all, you know, together? I mean, that's a huge scope. Is that, well, something you're used to? Or?
I think something that has been a really good springboard is that we've got a really long-standing, trusted relationship of working together on other projects. And so being able to come into that and not jump straight in, but to have the time to have conversations to say, what does success look like? What is inspiring us about this place? What is that high-level brief that Tom's just shared? To be able to take the time to think that through has been really beneficial, I think, rather than we've got a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time and we've got to do X, Y, and Z, which can become very process-driven. We've managed to be trusting enough to move away from that and know that that will all flow really smoothly out of some good high-level thinking. And then I think working with the wider team and various other architectural consultants that we've not worked with before, I think it's about establishing a process of really trying to understand the essence and the nub of what people are trying to achieve and not being afraid of sharing our needs as part of that. So it can be quite a challenging process, but a really constructive challenge to make design as good as it can be. And so I think it's not being scared of challenge in design, seeing it as part of a creative process, but also remembering that the process needs to be fun and constructive and that we're all coming away from it friends, because we spend a lot of time at work. We all care enormously about our work, don't we? So it needs to be positive.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of that positive challenge, as Angela's referring to there, that comes from having diversity of opinion in any conversation. And in this scenario, we're talking about a diversity of built environment specialists all around the table. And obviously within that, it's great if the specialists themselves are, you know, then have a diversity of perspective from the people in those teams as well. But purely from a discipline perspective, having that up front, creating a culture where it's a one-team approach, everyone's voice is listened to equally, and then it's kind of cards on the table, and then you kind of make a decision from that, as opposed to maybe a traditional approach to early stages of development, which would be what's the sketch and how do we kind of make that sketch work, which can result in great things. It can result in great buildings, but it can also maybe put a glass ceiling on what's possible in terms of moving the needle with regards to whole life carbon, or with regards to experience of place, or actually just with regards to the overall quality of what's being delivered, how easy it is to build, how fast it is to build. So we try to look at everything together at the outset of projects with the various architectural opinions, with the various consultant opinions, and then we sort of test that along the way through engagement with local community and other, you know, interested groups, etc. And that hopefully creates something that is, if not liked by everyone, is at least really considered, really robust, really well thought through, and ultimately is deliverable. Because I think no one really wants to spend time, energy, whether it's in a team or whether, more importantly, if you're a local resident or something being consulted on something that may never happen. I think it's always good if developments are conceived as something that is really deliverable, can actually deliver on the vision, so that it actually does make a difference to people's lives in the local community. Because if it stays on a piece of paper, then it never really has that long-term impact.
I think the bit that personally really excites me about my role and my job is where you take elements that look like they're in conflict at first glance, and really challenge to understand, well, what's the nub of what people are trying to achieve, and how can you reposition that so that you achieve both? Because I think that's where the innovation happens. So whether it's looking at how can we use more renewable materials and design like timber and make sure it's resilient and safe, or how can we on this site reuse the amazing stockpile of old cobbles, original cobbles, and also relay them but enable modern vehicles to track over them, make sure that they're also permeable so that we can get sustainable drainage going through them. How do you layer all of those needs together and make it work? And that's when you get innovation.
I think the collaboration also that we're having with Truman Estates themselves has been really helping kind of push the vision forward. They're a very long-term minded client. And I think certainly from a social and economic perspective, you need that actor to understand that we're not just talking about the sort of 5-6 year design, planning and construction phase, but we're talking about the sort of the 10, 20, 30 plus years of operation and in use. And I think Truman Estates have been brilliant at sort of really grasping that. They're already the estate manager. They already understand what it means to run a site like this, to run this site, I should say. And I think that's just really, it's been really helpful collaborating on a sort of day-to-day basis with Truman Estates. And I think it's just testament to their view of how they have already embedded themselves in this community, that they want to see it thrive. They want to see this as a success, and they want to do whatever they can to make that a reality. So I think that collaboration is really unique on this site, and something that I certainly haven't, done on a project before.
So here we've just come out of 91 Brick Lane. It was nice and toasty in there, and it's a bit chilly around here, but I think that's good. I think we need to walk the streets and really see where you've put your designs into action. So let's go. I think we're going to join Brick Lane now at this historic element, but we'll walk south.
Absolutely. So this is, hopefully we're going to see some of the kind of amazing variety of people who come to this part of London. And I think, there are lots of tourists here who come already, but there's also, local people, students, people who work here, obviously, come here every day, and, people who live here as well, and children as well. And I think that's some of the things that we've done, and especially we've worked with Publica, who are public realm specialists, and they've been able to, they've been coming around to this site for, months and months, and kind of almost a year and a half now, and coming at different times of the year, coming at different times of the day, different times of the week. And they've been, experiencing it and understanding how people, move about the site, move about the local area, what things there are to do besides Truman breweries, because I think that's one of the other important things is we want whatever happens on the scheme to complement what already exists in the local area. And I think it's all about not duplicating, but actually adding to and creating more than kind of bringing more to the area, but through complementing and not trying to compete with anything else. We're walking down famous Brick Lane now. Amazing smells, lots of noise. That's what we want at the site itself when it sort of all comes through. Is we want it to be a bustling, messy, kind of fun space.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? When you get this different perspective, in terms of walking down, we've only come 100 metres or so down from where we are, in quite a quiet little yard right onto Brick Lane, and that hyper-diversity of people, of experience, of sound is really, really amazing.
And so I get the sense that you need to work together with others, who've, like you said, sort of done the really granular analysis. And so are there others who are contributing to that? I know we've spoken to other consultants, cost analysis. Where does the cost and sort of, how we measure social value in this current sort of age is becoming tricky and complicated, but also we're all trying to sort of work it out together. How are you working together with the other consultants to work to sort of solve this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things we were saying earlier is about, that collaboration. And for us, it's about collaborating with our, the amazing team that Grow Places and Truman Estates have brought together. But it is also about collaborating with the community. And, we've done a lot of work. Loic have done great work kind of going out, having conversations, engaging with local people, business owners along, the Brick Lane Business Owners Group. Trying to understand, what their fears are about the development and trying to, reassure them, but also acknowledge that, we're not always going to get it right immediately, but that we're here and willing to learn and listen and work with them to ensure that we can do as much as we can to, as I was saying, complement what happens. So I think that collaboration goes, within the team itself, but also kind of outwards as well and into, the local councillors, community groups. We're having lots of conversations, not just in the immediate, Banglatown, Spitalfields area, but the wider Tower Hamlets area as well. And Tom and Truman Estates have been really integral to that because they've got those existing relationships. And for us, it's, not just about helicoptering in and, doing a fancy report for the planning application. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to really understand the existing partnerships, existing relationships, and, build on those and evolve those to make the scheme, as successful as it can be in the long term, and that legacy of social impact, economic impact, community wealth building as we possibly can.
I think a really nice example for me and something that's been really fun is we've spent as much time as possible coming down on site and getting into the existing buildings and walking around and doing that with the client and various people that work for Truman. And just as you chat to them, understanding that they've worked here and in this area for tens and decades of tens of years, and therefore the anecdotes and all the local people that they know and the little funny stories that they'll tell are just so enriching in terms of thinking about, that's the kind of place we want to create. We want people to behave like that in future.
Yeah, I think that, places and projects are multi-layered in terms of what goes into them. So I think what we've tried to do here is to assemble a team that brings the best of what the industry knows, which has a global, or at least, a national lens on what is best practice. How do we move the needle forwards? And then that actually sets up a number of kind of principles and approaches, which you could apply to different places because, people are people in their kind of core sense. There's a lot of kind of socioeconomic and psychological drivers that are consistent people. There's a lot of environmental things that are consistent about how we approach new builds or refurbishments. But then on the other end, there's a really hyper-local attitude to, okay, well, what does this sort of 100-meter radius mean? Let's study it in great detail. Let's look at the uses, ground floor, above. Let's talk to the people. Let's map it through different days of the week, times of day. So we're trying to sort of look at it in different ways. And I think that's a really interesting kind of perspective. And within that, hopefully you create something that is building on the best of what's here. Also being grown up enough to recognise that you can't change everything and you can't affect everything through one project or through one development, and not being too sort of rose-tinted about anything, trying to be sort of realistic and appropriate with where we are in the process and the impact we can have, but then trying to bring the lens that the local community doesn't necessarily have, which is, as I say, is that broader sort of industry best practice lens, and try to marry the two things together.
So what will be the impact for the existing places here? Because, for example, the shops that we have behind us, do they sit on this redevelopment site, and how will they be affected?
Yeah, so, well, actually, it's interesting that we've stopped here because it's a bit of a yes and no answer to that. You're behind you there, Dominique. That is part of the Truman estate. And then on the east of Brick Lane here and to the south of Brick Lane, that's not part of the site. So you have this kind of cheek by jowl relationship where, where we were earlier filming, looking down, you can kind of see from a bird's eye view how the Truman Brewery fits in with the street pattern. But when you're actually down here in the place, you don't necessarily feel that. You don't feel the scale of these buildings. You don't feel the scale of their footprint. And I think that's been one of the real key aspects of the master plan. We are, it's all relative, but some would say we're proposing quite large buildings on this site relative to certain aspects of the local conservation area or streets. But then actually they're comparable or actually smaller to some of the brewery buildings. But the footprint is bulk and mass is only one aspect of how a building feels. Actually, the majority of it is how it feels on a street and how the ground floor feels, how high it is, what's the approach to the way it addresses the street and welcomes people in. And those things are much more localized to different approaches around the site. So yes, there's areas of this view where it's Truman, where it's not, but hopefully it all just feels like one experience of a place, and hopefully the new bits, when they come on and emerge over time, will just feel like a continuation of that. So you don't necessarily feel where Truman starts and begins. It's much more just a feeling of being in Spitalfields and Banglatown, in a vibrant, creative, successful neighbourhood that people want to live in and visit.
So you touched on the word successful, and I guess a lot of business owners might be nervous about disruption or competition. So from a sort of social perspective and also from sort of the economic stacking, should these businesses be nervous? What's going to happen to their prospects, once this development, well, I suppose when it's going through its construction phase, which might take a number of years, and then afterwards, what are the projections telling on?
Yeah, I mean, we've been working a lot with Volterra, and they are the sort of experts in understanding, the current footfall, working with Arup's transport experts as well. This is already, as you can see, a really bustling, high footfall area. And so, there are a lot of people who, use this street. They kind of, go into the restaurants, go into the shops. And all that the scheme is going to do, or not all, but a lot of what the scheme is going to do is just raise that footfall slightly. And also we're looking to sort of see what can be done to elongate some of the hours and some of the days when people will be coming to this area. So in a way, yes, that there might be some disruptions during the construction, but really we see that the kind of rise in footfall is going to benefit the wider business community anyway. I think there are, as Tom was saying, it's about talking to those people and building that kind of more trusted relationship, being open and honest about some of the, short-term impacts that there will be, during construction, but actually what are the medium, longer-term benefits that they will see. And as I said earlier, being kind of consciously having those conversations and listening to what they've got to say, listening to their worries and really trying to address those through the design and through the programming and operation as well.
Fantastic. And there's an opportunity, I'm guessing, as you said, with the lengthening of business potential of a nighttime economy that feels possibly more inclusive, maybe of things that traditionally cities haven't done, which is, spaces for women or spaces for children, particularly at night, for example, people feeling safe, people of different sort of ethnic, diversity and etc. So,
I think that's a really good point. I think actually when you pick up, for example, that piece around the nighttime economy and lengthening out and talking about what exists, a place can be brilliant and wonderful, but nothing's perfect. So every place already has its needs. What can we do to improve and help evolve and address those needs? So that has then translated back into design in terms of thinking about security, thinking about how do we design a place that hasn't got, or that is going to feel safe, that has the right types of lighting, that has the right kind of ambience and vibrancy, that people are going to want to be in this area through times of days where maybe they're not at the moment. and diverse user groups. So whether that's designing for children, designing for the elderly is a big thing. And as you said, designing for women as well. They're all aspects that get those principles right and understand those needs. And you just make places better for everybody.
We've spoken a lot about, the impact of the here and the now, construction and sort of benefits for businesses. But how are you designing or researching for the society that we might have in 10, 20, 30 years? I mean, COVID interrupted so much. How can we possibly anticipate how we're going to use these spaces going forward?
Yeah, I think we would be foolish to kind of try and predict exactly how the space will be used in 10, 20 years. I think what we're, as Angela was speaking about in terms of building flexibility into the building design, we're also trying to build flexibility and adaptability in the public benefits, social value, community wealth building strategy. And what that means is you're putting in the infrastructure around sort of governance, monitoring, partnering, so that the series of commitments that Truman Estates are going to be making to fulfill their sort of desire to be like a highly socially valuable scheme, highly socially valuable master plan, that those principles will remain throughout, but that the interventions and activities that might be done to address the local needs and make the most of the local strengths, those may well have to adapt over time. And I think keeping that flexibility, keeping those relationships with people like Tower Hamlets, so that everyone's aware that we are completely committed, but the nuanced activities may have to flex and to best address those local needs, local priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely that. But there are some sort of really big kind of positives to this scheme that, we are delivering housing, we're delivering larger units for families, including affordable housing. We're delivering a large amount of new workspace, including affordable workspace that's tailored towards creative industries, like the creative ecosystem that Truman already got here, that prioritises apprenticeships and engaging with local people. And then we've got a vibrant programme of public spaces and uses that come off that, whether that's events spaces, cultural spaces, or spaces for leisure. And then viewing the place through a 24 hours a day or 7 days a week kind of lens about how does it kind of offer the most it can do, but doing that in a way that is in the spirit of what Truman is now. We're stood in Ellie's Yard now, and you look around, these buildings were built as part of the brewery. That wasn't built as a trendy shoe shop, or that wasn't built as a cool taco restaurant. But people have inhabited it over time, and life of the city has infiltrated the fabric of the buildings, and that's something that Truman, to be fair, very open about at the start. Like, a key part of the brief was we don't really know exactly what tenant is going to go here, what community-led program we're going to run at any given time, and that, I think that's the right approach for a scheme of this scale and complexity. What we can do is kind of try to understand as best as we possibly can what we think are the local needs, commercial needs, social needs, environmental needs we've kind of talked about, and then allow life to happen in these places. And I think that will be the enjoyment of seeing the place emerge over the decades, to see how people inhabit it. And maybe as we walk round onto Dray Walk, there's no better example than that, really, of a street, I don't think, at least I've seen in London, definitely, that is so flexible, it's so dynamic, and it changes throughout the week. There's a different use there on a Monday, so there is on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and you come back the next week and it's different again. And I think that variety of experience, it draws people here. It creates a place that's interesting.
And creates a place that people will want to come back to. Yeah. It's not just a place that people come once and then think that's it. It's actually they can return to. They know that there'll be something different on offer every few months. It'll be changing every week, and that kind of bringing people back to it and making it an exciting, evolving place is is really important.
Yeah, we live in a world now where people have got short attention spans. If you live in a city, you do so because you want a variety of experiences. You want to come and experience something new, but also maybe be somewhere that's really familiar. And that has a benefit for local businesses as well, because it is bringing people back to the area on a repeat basis. And people don't just come to Brick Lane to visit Truman. It may be one of the main reasons they come, but it might just be a stop on their journey throughout the day through the wider neighbourhood. So but I think that vibrancy, that vitality, that flexibility is something to really be celebrated. And it goes across everything, as we talked about, from the social programmes down to the leasing strategy, essentially.
I mean, inherently, being sustainable is to be long-term, isn't it? Whether economically, socially, environmentally. And I think what underpins all of our thinking and our approach is making sure that what might seem cutting-edge thinking now isn't obsolete and bog standard by the time that we come to try and deliver on it. So it's more about commitments and building in the ability for us to continue evolving, both through design, through building and through operation, and way beyond us.
And that's one of the benefits of having such a long-termist client in a way, because, they're here for the next 100 years. They want it to be a success and evolve and adapt over those, many, many decades to come. They're not sort of here to sell it off as some developers would do. It's kind of thing that they're really committed, and I think that's just so exciting for us as the consultants.
I think that's really true. Something that's really stuck with me from the very first time I met the client was a conversation we had about the next 400 years. Truman has existed and evolved for so long already, and we want that to continue for the same again and beyond.
What a brief. We're so often sorry, so that's 10 years, 30 years, and we're saying that we need to build for 100 years. And here you've got the space for 400 years and beyond. That's fantastic.
We'll all be here to see it.
That's right, well, thank you so much, Letty. Thank you. It's been incredible. And we've learnt so much about just how this all knits together. It's going to be fascinating to see it all come to fruition. So that's it from us. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Places podcast. For more information, visit growplaces.com and follow us at We Grow Places across all social channels. See you next time.